Hey, welcome back to Michael Tells, the channel where we sit back and listen to stories worth hearing. A guy goes on a blind date, and the woman across the table turns out to be married to the pastor who did his own wedding years earlier. And it only gets messier from there. Quick thing, the channel's having a rough patch, so a like or a comment really helps right now. All right, let's get into it.
I recognized her before she recognized me. That's the part I keep coming back to, even now, a few years later. I had maybe 10 seconds where I knew exactly who she was, and she still had no idea who I was. 10 seconds. I could have stood up, dropped a 5 on the table for the coffee, and walked back out into the rain, and none of the rest of it would have happened. I didn't do that, obviously, or I wouldn't be sitting here telling you any of this. The weird part wasn't that my blind date turned out to be married. That happens. People lie on those apps all the time. I'd run into married women on dating apps before. One time, I figured it out halfway through the first drink. So that part, unfortunately, wasn't even new. That part I could have handled. The weird part was who she was married to. Let me back up. My name's Nolan. I was 32 when this happened. I live in Tacoma, in one of those apartment complexes off the arterial, where every building is the same beige and the parking is always half a lawsuit waiting to happen. I coordinate routes and inventory for a medical equipment supplier out in Fife. It's exactly as exciting as it sounds. I make sure the right oxygen concentrators and hospital beds and boxes of tubing get on the right trucks to the right clinics. And when the numbers on the warehouse floor don't match the numbers in the system, I'm the guy who stays late trying to figure out where a pallet went. I'm up around 6:30 most mornings, home most nights after 5. I drive a 2017 Mazda 6. Dark gray, which I am still, embarrassingly, making payments on. I'm not going to pretend I have some rich social life. I don't. Between the commute and the job and the drive back and the couch, most of my week is just that. Somewhere in the last couple of years, I basically stopped meeting women the normal way. There is no normal way when most of your life is a warehouse, I-5, and whatever's left of the evening when you get home. So, dating apps. About 2 years of them. And I wasn't bitter about it. I met a lot of people. Some of it was funny in hindsight. There was one woman who spent the entire dinner talking about her ex, like full biography, and I just sat there like her court-appointed therapist. There was another who, maybe 20 minutes in, told me she was looking for someone ready to have kids within the year. And I respected the efficiency, but that was pretty much that. A few perfectly nice women where there just wasn't anything there. And one I actually dated for close to 2 months before it quietly went nowhere, the way those things do. I wasn't angry about any of it. Honestly, the apps just felt like the most realistic way to meet somebody when your life is that small. That's all it was. There's one more thing you should know before I get to her, because it matters. I was married once. I got married at 27 to a woman named Hannah. It lasted a little over 3 years. And before you brace yourself, no, there's no big story there. Nobody cheated. There was no screaming, no thrown plates. We just figured out, pretty fast actually, that we wanted really different lives, and we were both too stubborn to admit it for a while. And then one day, we weren't. We'd split about 2 years before all of this happened. It was sad in a low, ordinary way. We're not in touch, but I don't wish her anything bad. Here's the piece that ends up mattering. Our wedding was done by a pastor, a guy named Everett. He ran a small, non-denominational church in Lakewood called Harbor Ridge. Younger guy, earnest. The kind of person who remembers your name and actually means it when he asks how you're doing. Hannah was the churchgoer, really. I tagged along for a couple of years because that's what you do. But I got to know Everett a little. He married us in October with the leaves all wet on the ground outside. And near the end, when things were falling apart, Hannah and I actually went and sat in his office once and talked. It didn't save anything, but he tried. And I remembered his wife. Not well. I want to be honest about that, because the honesty is the whole thing here. I couldn't have told you 3 real facts about her. Her name was Mara. She was around the church constantly, the way a pastor's wife is, at the Christmas drives and the potlucks and the welcome tables for new families. I'd seen her 100 times across a room. She was probably even at my wedding, somewhere in the back. But I don't think she and I ever exchanged more than a "hey" in a hallway. To her, I would have been one of hundreds of faceless people her husband had married over the years. That's important. She did not remember me at all. Keep that in your head. Okay, so by then I'd been divorced a while, and I got tired of the usual apps. The swiping, the photos, the whole feeling of shopping for a person. And I downloaded this smaller one called Unseen. The whole gimmick of Unseen was that you couldn't see anyone's photo at first. You only got a name, an age, a rough distance, and a few short answers to these little prompt questions. The idea was you talk to someone before you ever see their face. Decide if you actually like the person first. I know how that sounds now. At the time, it just felt like a nice change. Slower. More like meeting somebody than ranking them. That's where I met Mara. She used her real first name, no last name because the app didn't show last names. Just Mara, 34, a few miles out. We talked for a little over 3 weeks before we ever met. And I have to be honest with you, there was nothing magic about it at first. I didn't get struck by lightning. She wasn't dazzling me with anything. She was just easy to talk to. She'd message something like, "Did you survive Monday?" Or tell me some tiny story about the woman ahead of her in line at the grocery store who was arguing with the self-checkout machine. Small stuff. Human stuff. The thing that actually got me was that she remembered things. If I mentioned a bad day at work, a shipment that got lost, 2 days later she'd ask if it ever got sorted out. Nobody had asked me a follow-up question in a long time. That's a sad thing to admit, but it's true. That's what pulled me in. Not looks I couldn't even see, just the fact that somebody was paying attention. There were a couple of small, weird things, though. I noticed them, I just didn't let myself think about them. She almost never answered on Sunday mornings, like silent until early afternoon, every Sunday. After 8 or 9 at night, she'd sometimes just vanish mid-conversation. She wouldn't give me her Instagram or her Facebook. And when I suggested we grab coffee somewhere near me in Tacoma, she got a little tense and said she'd feel more comfortable meeting in Olympia. Olympia? That's a good 35-40 minutes down I-5 for me. More if the traffic near the base is bad. And I remember thinking, that's a haul. But I told myself she probably just didn't want to run into someone she knew, which, in hindsight, is one of the more accurate guesses I've ever made, and I still let it slide right past me. I just said something like, "If Olympia makes you more comfortable, then Olympia it is." So we set it up. Saturday, 2:30 in the afternoon. Not a restaurant, not anything fancy, a little independent cafe/bakery a few blocks off the Capitol campus. It was raining, of course. That fine Washington drizzle that isn't really rain. It just kind of hangs there and gets you wet anyway. I drove down, found street parking about a block away, and got there early because I'm always early. It's a whole thing. Bought a coffee I didn't need, one of those thin paper cups that's already too hot to hold. Sat by the window, draped my wet jacket over the back of the chair, and I waited. The door opened a few times. Wind, a little bell over the door, people shaking off umbrellas. And then it opened again, and a woman came in. And I knew her. I mean, I knew her the way you know a face you've seen 100 times but never really looked at. It took my brain a second to catch up. Mara. Mara Rowe, Pastor Everett's wife. The wife of the man who, 5 years earlier, stood in front of me and Hannah in a church in Lakewood and told us we were husband and wife. My whole body just kind of went cold and still. For a couple of seconds, I genuinely told myself it was a coincidence, that she'd just walked in for coffee, that any second her husband would come in behind her, shaking out an umbrella, and this would be the most awkward hello of my life, and then I'd leave. But then she pulled out her phone, looked at it, looked up, looked around the room, and she looked at me, and she smiled, and she started walking toward my table. And that's when it landed. It's her. She's my date. My blind date is the pastor's wife. She sat down across from me. Nolan? Mara? She looked good, honestly. Better than I remembered from all those church hallways. Different out of that setting, I guess. And here's a detail I couldn't unsee once I saw it. There was a pale strip of skin on her left ring finger. A tan line, sort of. The kind you get from a ring you've worn for a long time and just took off. I figured she'd taken it off before she came in. There wasn't much else that pale strip could have been. We fumbled through a couple of lines. How was the drive? Did you find parking? The usual nothing.
And I just could not do it. I couldn't sit there and pretend. So I said, I know your husband. She laughed a little, like I was making some weird joke she didn't get. Everett Rowe, I said. And her face changed. It just fell, right in front of me. All the polite date face went out of it. How? She said. He married me. There was this little pause, and then I added, well, me and my ex-wife. I'll be honest with you, the first thing I thought, sitting there watching her realize what was happening, was to leave. Every reasonable part of me was going, get up, this is not your problem, walk away. I didn't. And it wasn't because I looked at her and wanted her. It wasn't some forbidden romance thing. It's dumber and more human than that. I was just curious, genuinely, powerfully curious. What is the wife of the pastor who did my wedding doing on a dating app 40 minutes from home with her ring in her pocket? So instead of leaving, I asked her straight out, does Everett know you're here? And she said, no. That was the first moment I understood this was real. Not a game, not a lark. This woman was sitting across from me, having done something that could blow up her entire life. And she just told me the truth about it. So I stayed. Okay, I gotta stop him right here. This is the moment he could have just left, right? Ring in her pocket, married to the guy who did his wedding. Every alarm is going off. But be honest with me. If you were sitting at that table, would you have walked out? Or would you have stayed just to hear the rest? Tell me down in the comments, because I already know what I'd do. We ended up sitting in that cafe for almost 2 hours, and there was nothing romantic about it. No kiss, no hand-holding, nothing. It was two people talking, and one of them slowly telling the other how her life had gotten to this point. The thing she got across, not all at once but in pieces over those 2 hours, was that Everett wasn't a monster. She kept coming back to that. He didn't hit her, he didn't cheat, he didn't control the money. There's nothing horrible I can point to, she said at one point, and then, a little quieter, that's almost worse. Because it meant she could never explain to anyone why she wanted out. No headline, no villain. She didn't lay it all out in some clean speech. It came in fragments. I don't know who I am there anymore. Everybody knows me as his wife. I've been trying to leave for a long time. And I sort of filled in the rest myself, sitting there across from her. They'd met young, 21, 22. Everett wasn't even a pastor back then. That came later. And somewhere over 10 years, she'd stopped being a person and turned into a role. Pastor Everett's wife. People watching what she wore, whether she showed up, whether she smiled enough, why there still weren't any kids. A microscope she never asked for a decade. At one point she said, I got tired of being good at a life I didn't want anymore. She wasn't dramatic about it. She wasn't playing the wounded wife. She even gave Everett his due, said he knew things were bad, that they'd talked about separating, that he'd offered counseling. She just kept putting off the actual decision, kicking it down the road. And the app, she said, wasn't about finding an affair. She just wanted to know if she was still capable of being someone other than Everett's wife, whether there was still a person in there. And I said, that's still cheating, Mara. She didn't argue with me. She just said,
I know. I gave her a whole speech, or as close to a speech as I get. I told her I wasn't going to be her secret boyfriend, that if she wanted to leave her husband, that decision had to exist on its own, completely separate from me. I didn't want to be the reason. I didn't want to be the excuse she'd use to run out of a marriage and then have that be my fault for the rest of my life. I actually believed all of that when I said it. I want that on the record. We said goodbye in the parking lot in the drizzle, and I drove home up I-5 thinking, well, that was one of the strangest afternoons of my adult life, and I'll never see her again. Except that night, she texted me. I'm sorry I put you in that position. I answered pretty coldly, something short. And then we didn't talk for a few days, and I figured that was it. Good, clean break, back to my beige apartment and my lost palettes. Then she texted again, and it wasn't flirty. It was just something normal, some ordinary little thing, a question about nothing. And I answered, and she answered. And just like that, we were talking again. I knew it was a bad idea. I did. I'm not one of those guys in these stories who claims he had no idea what he was doing. I knew exactly what I was doing. But now there was this strange intimacy between us, because I knew her biggest secret and nobody else did. And there's a kind of gravity to that. It pulls you in. Over the next few weeks, we met up a few more times, always far from Lakewood, Olympia, Lacey. Once we just walked along the waterfront, hands in our pockets. And it was nice, and I hated how nice it was. And every single time, she'd tell me she was going to talk to Everett soon. And every single time, she'd find a reason not to.
That's when I started to see the other side of her. Just a little at first.
Because when I finally called it out, when I said, "You've been saying soon for 3 weeks now," she snapped at me. "You have no idea what I have to lose." And she was mad, really mad, for about an hour. And then she called back and apologized and was warm again, like nothing had happened. That became a pattern, and I started noticing little things, stuff I probably would have ignored earlier. She'd get defensive, fast. She'd get impulsive. She would flip from warm to cold and back with no bridge in between. It wasn't dramatic enough to scare me off. It was just enough to make a small voice in the back of my head go, huh. Then one night, she didn't text. She called, which she never did. She said, "I told him." She'd finally told Everett she wanted a separation. And she'd told him she'd met someone on a dating app. She didn't say my name at first, but he asked questions the way you do. And eventually she said it, and he heard my name. The next day I got a call from a number I didn't know. I almost didn't pick up. It was Everett, and I braced for it. I fully expected yelling, threats, "How dare you?" the whole thing. I'd earned some of that, at least in his eyes. But he was calm, which was so much worse. He said, "I remember you." "Yeah," I said. "Your wedding was in October, wasn't it?" I couldn't believe he remembered. And I said, "Yeah, it was." He didn't try to talk me out of anything. He didn't beg. He just asked me one thing. He said, "Did anything happen before she told me?" And I told him the truth. No, because it was true. Whatever else I did wrong, that part was true. And he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Good, at least give me that." And then he said something I still think about. He said, "I don't think you're the reason she's leaving, but I think right now she needs you to be the reason."
Then he thanked me for being honest.
Somehow, that felt worse than if he'd yelled at me, and he hung up.
Man, that phone call. I did not expect that. You keep waiting for this guy to be the villain, and instead, he's calm, he's decent, and he says the one thing that actually lands. She needs you to be the reason. That's not a bad man, that's just a broken situation. Am I the only one who suddenly feels bad for the husband here? Let me know.
A few weeks after that, Mara actually did it. She moved out of the house, got a little apartment over in Lacey, and she and Everett started the divorce for real. And I want to be really clear about this because it matters to the whole story. She didn't go back. This wasn't a manipulation, wasn't a cry for attention. She genuinely ended her marriage. And it cost her. In a small church community, word moves fast. She lost a few people she'd thought were close friends. Everett took a few weeks away from the church, just stepped back for a while. It wasn't some huge scandal. Nobody was screaming from the pulpit. It was just a quiet, awful, personal mess playing out in a place where everybody knew everybody. And only after all of that, only once she was actually living on her own and the divorce was real, did I let myself treat what we had as a real relationship. And here's the thing nobody in these stories wants to admit. At first, it was good. It really was. We'd get takeout and eat it on the floor of her half-empty apartment surrounded by Target boxes she hadn't unpacked. We built this cheap IKEA table together, the little round one, and it took us 2 hours and we messed up the legs and laughed about it. I helped her carry boxes up the stairs. We watched old movies. We drove around getting coffee for no reason. For the first time, we could actually walk around Tacoma without her checking over her shoulder to see who was standing behind us. And I thought, honestly, maybe this whole insane detour actually led me somewhere. Maybe all that mess was the price of meeting the right person. That lasted a couple of months. Because the problem, I eventually figured out, wasn't that Mara left Everett. The problem was that she brought the whole thing with her. Everything she'd been running from, she packed it up and carried it into us. She could not handle even the smallest hint of being rejected. If I was wiped after a bad week and didn't want to make the drive to Lacey, that wasn't me being tired. That was, you're pulling away. If I didn't answer a text for 40 minutes because I was on the warehouse floor, it was, you used to answer me right away. She hated when I mentioned Hannah. Even if it was just some neutral story from years ago, some anecdote, she'd go cold. One time, she found a shoebox in my closet with some old photos in it. Nothing romantic, just my life. And she wanted to know why I still had them, why I hadn't thrown them out. Another time, after a totally fine dinner, she suddenly picked a fight because a buddy of mine had said, weeks earlier, man, this whole situation is kind of messed up. And I hadn't defended her hard enough in the moment. Weeks earlier. She'd been holding it. And the worst part? The part that really wore me down was that after a bad fight, she could say genuinely cruel things, cut right to the bone. And then the next morning, she'd act almost completely normal, while I was still carrying whatever she'd said the night before. And somewhere in there, around 3 or 4 months in, I started to understand something I really didn't want to understand. Some of the things she told me about Everett were probably true. I don't doubt she felt trapped. I don't doubt that role crushed something in her. But I also started to see, for the first time, how hard it might have been to actually live with her. Not because Everett was some saint. He wasn't. He'd absolutely put the church and the work ahead of his marriage for years. He'd let her suffocate in that role and told himself counseling would just patch it up like a tire. But a marriage almost never falls apart as cleanly as one person describes it. I knew that from my own. And I'd only ever heard her version.
And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because up until now, we were kind of on her side, weren't we? But he's right. We only ever heard one version of that marriage, same as him. So, real question, was she the victim here? Or was everybody just a little bit wrong? Drop your take below. I'm genuinely curious how this one splits the room.
She'd wanted freedom so badly. And then the second she had it, she was terrified of losing me. And that fear, that constant need for me to prove I wasn't going anywhere, it slowly turned into her holding on so tight, I couldn't breathe. The exact thing she'd escaped, just pointed at me now. The end wasn't dramatic. That's what gets me. There was no affair, no betrayal, no big secret, no plate through a window. It was a Saturday. I'd had a brutal week, and I just wanted to stay home, order food, watch something, not talk. She wanted me to come to Lacey. I said no, not tonight. And she said, "You made me believe I blew up my life for something." And I said, "I told you from the very beginning not to leave him for me." And she said, "That's easy for you to say now." And that's the moment I understood, fully, that we were living in two completely different versions of this story. In mine, she left a marriage that wasn't working, and afterward, separately, she and I tried to make something, and it didn't take. Simple. Sad, but simple. But in hers, somewhere deep down, I was the proof. I was the evidence that leaving Everett had been the right call, which meant every single problem between us wasn't just a problem. Every problem became proof, in her head, that maybe leaving Everett had been a mistake. No relationship can carry that. Mine sure couldn't. A few days later, I drove out to her place. No yelling this time. We were both quiet. I told her I didn't think we were making each other better. I think I actually said it like that, which sounds like something off a coffee mug now, but I meant it. She got angry first, then she cried, and then she asked me, "So what was all of this for?" And I didn't have a good answer. I still don't, really. I said, "I don't think everything that ends was for nothing." And even as it was coming out of my mouth, it sounded weak, like something you say because the silence is unbearable, not because it's true. We didn't stay friends. There was no maybe someday. It was just over. About a year later, I heard through somebody I used to know that the divorce was final. Everett doesn't work at Harbor Ridge anymore. He didn't get run out or anything dramatic. He just took a position at another small church about an hour from Lakewood. I guess he wanted somewhere he wasn't reminded of the whole thing every Sunday. I get that. Mara stayed in the area for a while and then moved down closer to her sister, in Vancouver, the Washington one, down by the river. I never saw her again. I never went back to Harbor Ridge either. Wouldn't feel right. And after a while, I put the regular dating apps back on my phone. Tinder, Hinge, the usual. But Unseen, I deleted for good. You'd think the strangest part of this whole thing would be the coincidence that my blind date, out of everyone in Western Washington, turned out to be married to the pastor who did my wedding. And yeah, that's a hell of a thing. But that's not what stays with me. What stays with me is how easily I believed it. How completely I fell for this idea that if a person is unhappy enough in their old life, then in a new life, they'll just automatically become someone different, someone free, someone better. That's not how it works. I know that now. Mara had every right to leave a marriage she didn't want to be in anymore. That was hers to do. Everett had every right to be wrecked by the way it happened. And I had the right, eventually, to figure out that feeling sorry for someone is not the same thing as a reason to build a life with them. Everett married me once, years ago, on a wet October afternoon. Years after that, his wife almost became the reason I tried marriage again. I drove down to Olympia that Saturday, just hoping to finally meet someone. And I did. Just not someone I was ever supposed to keep.
And that's where it ends. No big twist, no happy ending. Just a guy who learned that feeling sorry for someone isn't the same as loving them. Honestly, that stuck with me. So tell me, do you think he made the right call in the end? Or did he give up too soon? I read every comment, so let's talk it out. And if this one kept you watching, a like really does help the channel right now. I'll see you in the next story.